All right. Oh, Scott, Scott got real blurry. No idea why that's happening. As you can see, we have Scott Ritter here, but having some camera difficulties. I don't know what causes that. What kind of camera do you have, Scott?
A Logic camera, high definition. I don't know. It does that every once in a while. It goes out of whack. It's like it's drunk.
Well, maybe
we can solve this by just swapping over to my computer camera.
Yeah, or if you wanted to reload, I don't know, it's fine. Okay, well, we got Scott Ritter here, everyone. Hit that like button while we're introduced. He's a former UN weapons inspector, also part of Marine Corps intelligence. He's, of course, one of the most prolific analysts on Ukraine and geopolitical matters. Friend of the show. Always enjoy having Scott here. There you are. So before we get started, though, everyone, make sure that you're liking this stream so that we are, boosting this around so everyone gets a chance to see it against the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. And of course, as usually how it goes with guests like Scott, we're going to have a couple of Patreon member questions. YouTube members, Patreon members, and Substack members can all submit questions to guests, as well as other perks. So please do support the show by becoming a member, Patreon being the best option. You can find all that information in the links in the description. But let's get started, everyone. Scott, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good now. We solved the camera issue.
Yeah. It is getting late, so maybe it is drunk. So let's, I know you've been busy too. So let's get started, though. A lot has been going on, as per usual. Maybe we can begin with what happened just a few days ago. Vladimir Tatarsky killed in St. Petersburg through an explosion at a cafe. The Wagner group has given him kind of honorary membership, his family access to benefits. The Ukraine government is implicated. Even the Western media and the United States will say that some aspects of Ukraine's government is implicated. What do you make of this attack? There have been comparisons to what happened to Daria Dugina, the daughter of Alexander Dugin, earlier last year. What do you make of this? What's the significance of this? It seems like a pretty significant event, but it comes in the midst as the US and Western media talk about the Wall Street Journal journalist who's right now detained in Russia. That's getting a lot of attention as this huge violation of free speech. But when I was looking at the Western media, there was a lot of, I would say, denigrating of Mr. Tatarsky. He's just a blogger, that some were arguing that this is fair game. I mean, what do you make of all of this, and what's the significance given? I mean, I think he was on the same list that you're on, right, Scott? The Meritovitz list. Anyway, I'll let
Yeah.
you go off.
Well, I first of all, I would take violent umbrage at anybody who said he's just a blogger, therefore he should die. Tell you what, meet me in the back shed. We'll talk about what's going to happen to you. No, it doesn't work that way, guys. Free speech is free speech. Okay, if you're an American and you claim to be an American, you claim to appreciate the Constitution of the United States, free speech is free speech. Now, I know that Mr. Tatarsky, or Maxim Fomin is his real name, is not an American citizen. But how dare you? How dare anybody who is born in this country say that just because he's a blogger who posts things that you find you object to, that this is a death penalty? God forbid you ever get on the other side of that, and somebody decides that what you're posting, what you say, indeed what you think, is violently objective, and they target you for death. It's not how it works. Whether you agree or disagree with what he posted, this was a war correspondent. This is a man who went out and collected information and packaged it and delivered it to an audience. And it wasn't an insignificant audience. He had over 500,000 subscribers to his Telegram channel, and he was widely quoted. I will tell you straight up that I didn't agree with everything he posted, that I was not a fan of his analysis. But I read it. I followed him because I think it's important that you educate yourself with a wide variety of opinions. And he had an opinion that was influential. He was targeted by the Ukrainian intelligence services. This is becoming more and more clear. This was a targeted assassination by an organization that maintains the Meritovitz hit list. He was targeted for saying things that the Ukrainian government found objectionable. Daria Dugina was assassinated by the Ukrainian special services. Now, she may have been the unintended consequence of their targeting of her father. We don't know exactly, but it appears that they were trying to kill him, but because she swapped out the automobile at the last second, she's the one that was killed, and not him. But that doesn't change the fact that the Ukrainian government targets journalists for death. I'll just say that one more time so it sinks in. Later on, we start talking about, what the Russian government is alleged to be doing against an American journalist. The Ukrainian government targets journalists for death. They kill them. I'm on that list. That means that ostensibly I'm targeted for death. For what? For saying things that people find objectionable? Sorry, that's not a death penalty. And here's the worst part. The United States government funds this activity. The Ukrainian government has no ability to generate income right now. They're bankrupt. Their economy is trash. So they operate, based upon the donations made by the United States government. And the United States government funds the Ukrainian intelligence services. We also fund the office of the presidency of Volodymyr Zelensky. His office operates an organization called the Center for Countering Disinformation. It is an organization that was created by the State Department with funding from the State Department. Its meetings are organized by the State Department. And in fact, in July 14th of last year, the State Department organized a meeting of the Center for Countering Disinformation where they published a blacklist. And on that blacklist were a number of Americans who were targeted as Russian propagandists. They were called information terrorists, with an emphasis on the terrorist, meaning that they should be treated as you would a terrorist. That's marked for death, by the way. And also war criminals. We should be arrested and all. Now, my name's on that list. Recently, I was elevated to the #1 spot on that list. I'm at the top. And that list is a feeder list to the Miratorits list. So if you're number one on the Center for Countering Disinformation's list, you're high up on the Miratorits list. So I take this a little bit personally. And that's why I get a little angry at people who say, no, that's okay, kill them. Really? Really? You think that's a good idea to kill journalists? You kill people that you don't agree with. That's insane. And the fact that the U.S. government funds this, thereby implicitly supporting this, means that the U.S. government's in the business of killing journalists who dissent, who disagree with the official narrative. Now we can compare and contrast that with the treatment of the Wall Street Journal, journalist who was arrested in Russia on charges of espionage. Now there's a difference, you see. When I write something and post it, you can disagree with it, but I'm not releasing classified information. I'm not spying. I'm not doing something that's harmful to the national security of any nation. This man was caught red-handed, allegedly, receiving classified information. He was in a town, Ekaterinburg, where there are some sensitive military-industrial facilities that produce objects that are essential to the special military operation. And he was digging into production levels to find out if the Russians were in fact producing particular kinds of munitions to the quantities claimed. Now you can say that that's a legitimate journalistic question, but you don't get to go and get classified documents. That's against the law. You violate the law. You are technically a spy. Now he may have an excuse, and he'll be brought before a judge, and he'll make his case. But there's no comparison whatsoever between somebody who was caught receiving classified information and somebody who was killed simply because the blog that he ran was unpopular in Ukraine. And to try and make a comparison between the two is absurd. It's just purely absurd. If you're a journalist, don't go collecting classified information. It's illegal here, and it definitely is illegal in Russia. It's illegal in just about every nation there is. There's no journalistic pass. Hi, I work for the New York Times. Hi, I work for the Wall Street Journal. Therefore, I get to see classified information from people unauthorized to do it. Now, in the United States, we do give journalists a pass. We know, for instance, Edward Snowden released extraordinarily sensitive documents to the press, and the press published some of these. We know that Julian Assange did the same thing. Now, Assange, because he's not an American citizen, he's being prosecuted for executing what would ostensibly be First Amendment rights. But notice that no New York Times journalist, no Washington Post journalist, no Guardian journalist is being prosecuted for publishing the same information that Julian Assange published. This is an assault on free speech. That's what the United States does. That's what Great Britain does. We assault free speech. Julian Assange is in prison right now, the 1,000th day of his imprisonment in Belmarsh, a maximum security prison in London, where he is literally dying. I would advise everybody listening to go watch the documentary film Ithaca. It's a sobering movie based upon the support that Julian Assange is receiving from his family, from his father, John Shipton, his brother, Gabriel Shipton, and from his wife, Stella Assange. It's heartbreaking to see what's being done to him. But every American, every Brit should understand there, but for the grace of God, go you. And if Julian Assange is successfully prosecuted, that's the end of free speech in America. Because if you ever publish something that the U.S. government takes umbrage to, and can find a potential to say you have published classified information, that's how you're going to be treated. That's how we treat Julian Assange. The Russians aren't putting anybody, they're not torturing anybody to death. Julian Assange is being tortured to death by the British, and he will be tortured to death by the Americans when he comes here, if he is indeed extradited. There's no American journalist in Russian prison being tortured to death. There are people serving time for espionage. They've been found guilty in a court of law. We can sit here and say that's not true. That's a trumped up charge, whatever. We did the same thing to that poor Russian girl, the redhead who had the NRA fixation and all this stuff. We put her in jail.
Butina, right?
Marina Butina. Put her in jail for being an unregistered foreign lobby. She didn't commit espionage, but we treated her like that. So please get off your high horse if you're an American. Okay, there is a double standard here. We arrest people, we torture. Ask her how she was treated. Ask her how she was treated. Ask her what the Bureau of Prisons does. And if you want to put a blind eye to what they do, I'll tell you, they do it. If they're accused of doing it, they do it. Corrections officers are scum personified. These are people who are out of control. There's no checks and balances. They murder prisoners every day in America. They abuse prisoners because they can, because nobody cares about them. They're locked away and forgotten. And Maria Butina was put into that system, and she was sexually assaulted by Bureau of Prison authorities. She was put in solitary confinement. They harassed her. They tortured her. For what? Because she failed to register, in her lobbying efforts on behalf of the National Rifle Association. Okay, so I really don't want to hear anything about this. I'm not saying that the Russians treat their prisoners any better than we do, but the fact is, we have a gentleman, Mr. Whalen, a former Marine, who was accused of gathering information in an unauthorized fashion. He's currently serving a espionage sentence. We have this new Wall Street Journal journalist who is probably going to be prosecuted. And if you're prosecuted in Russia for espionage, you're going to be found guilty of it. And he's going to do a jail time for what? For committing a crime, a real crime, not a faked up, trumped up crime. But now we come back to Maxim Fomin. He was murdered, assassinated by the Ukrainian government with the implicit approval of the United States government. So the United States government is in the business of assassinating journalists that they don't agree to. And that's just straight up truth. And, I take it personally because I may be traveling to Russia in the near future. And if that happens, is the U.S. government going to allow the Ukrainian government to target me? Now, the Russians will say, we'll protect you, we'll take care of you. But that's not the point. It shouldn't be about protection. Journalists should not have to have protection traveling and doing their job. The fact that they have to have protection means somebody's trying to kill them, which means somebody doesn't appreciate free speech. Now, we know the Ukrainian government is that kind of government, but the United States government is funding them, is supporting them, is silent as they target Americans. And that should be disturbing to everybody.
Indeed, you brought up so many great points. I mean, I remember reading recently, this is during the Ukraine conflict over the last year or so. Miss Butina, Marie Butina, wrote an incredible piece in Russia, well, formerly Russia Today, RT, on what she experienced in prison. And I think she penned an open letter to Angela Davis talking about what she witnessed, not just with what she went through, but also with a lot of the mainly Black female prisoners that experienced the conditions she did. And it changed her, almost like her entire worldview. So, not only this, though, what you were saying about the Wall Street Journal journalist, I'm not even going to say his name, because honestly, at this point, what this feels like is just utter hypocrisy, because Julian Assange was provided information, right? And you said, Scott, journalists are protected. If you are provided information, you're not collecting the information. You're not actively getting it. People are giving it to you, and you're releasing it to the public as part of journalistic duty. That's what Julian Assange did, and his team. And he's being tortured in a witch hunt. This journalist was literally doing the espionage. it's different. And yet Julian Assange is being charged with the Espionage Act, and we'll see what happens to this journalist. But the treatment of them is so different. And then you have, of course, Mr. Tatarsky, who was just blatantly killed. Where do you place these attacks by Ukraine? Because the SBU is implicated. That's what Russia is saying. Even the Western media and U.S. officials are saying that there is Ukrainian involvement. I think the woman who gave the bomb to Mr. Tatarsky is like a follower of Mr. Navalny, who prominent Russian opposition, I say, but really a Russian opposition figure with not much popularity in Russia, but a lot of support from the United States. Where do you place these attacks on journalists? I mean, literal assassinations and attempts to silence critics of Ukraine and critics of U.S. and NATO support for Ukraine. Where do you place this in the overall scheme of the war right now?
A tragic distraction. It's going to have zero impact on Russia. Russia is operating in accordance with a plan. That plan is being executed effectively. And the Russians aren't going to allow themselves to be distracted by something like this. It would be foolish for Russia to overreact to this. I mean, it's tragedy what happened. They will investigate. They will hold those responsible accountable. But there's people out there saying that Russia should do this, do that, do this, do that. That means that Russia would be allowing Ukraine to dictate the pace of the battle. That Russia is so immature that when something of this nature happens, it overreacts and therefore loses whatever initiative, et cetera, that it had. Ukraine blew up the Crimea bridge. Russia could have used that as an excuse to, target Zelensky, target the Ukrainian government, start killing leaders. They didn't. Why? Because they understood that the ideal way this war ends is to get Zelensky to come to the negotiating table. And if you kill him, he can't come to the negotiating table. If you kill him, you don't know who's going to replace him. You don't know what's going to happen. Right now, the Russians are dealing with predictability. That's one of their favorite words. They like predictability. And Zelensky provides a predictability factor in terms of, achieving a negotiated outcome, which is what Russia has wanted all along. People forget that the phase one of this special military operation wasn't an effort to seize Kiev. It was an effort to pressure the Ukrainian government to the negotiating table, and they succeeded. Within a week of initiating this conflict, Ukraine began meeting with Russian negotiators in Gomel in Belarus. There were 3 meetings in the first week or so of the conflict that led to a 4th meeting in Istanbul on the 1st of April. And that meeting should have produced a ceasefire agreement that would have brought the war to an end. That's what Russia was seeking. Instead, Boris Johnson flew into Kiev, told the Ukrainians to not do that, to shelve it. And now we have a war that's cost Ukraine hundreds of thousands of lives, tens of millions of displaced people, $1 trillion of infrastructure damage, all because the West wasn't happy with the peace deal that Russia was putting on the table back then. Well, I mean, people would die to have that peace agreement today, because it basically just said that Crimea is Russia forever. Lugansk and Donetsk will be independent. Ukraine can't join NATO, but pretty much everything else gets to stay the same. Imagine how many people would be alive, how many families would be intact, how many children would have fathers, how many wives would have husbands, how many sisters would have brothers, how many parents would have sons. But now that's not the case. And Ukraine is locked in a death match with a larger opponent who can't be beat. And Ukraine is being urged forward, even though the chances of victory are non-existent. They're being urged forward by their masters in the West, NATO, et cetera. Ukraine is a proxy of NATO. They're carrying out a war on behalf of NATO against Russia, and they're being destroyed in the process. This is a tragedy. But Russia wanted this war to end. Russia wants this war to end, and that's why we don't see this kind of escalation. So the Russians aren't going to overreact to the murder of Maxim Fomin, of Mr. Tatarsky, just like they didn't overreact to the murder of Darya Dugina, who was the daughter of a very influential Russian philosopher, Alexander Dugin. They didn't overreact to the attack on the Crimea bridge. They don't overreact to these Ukrainian drone strikes against Russian strategic bomber bases in Engels. Again, your average American's going, well, I mean, come on, Russia's flying out of there. That should be. You guys understand that that's the equivalent of somebody attacking a B-52 base in Omaha, Nebraska, or another any other in North Dakota. We wouldn't allow it to happen, guys. That's a strike on our strategic nuclear deterrent. And so Russia could have overreacted. That's literally one of the triggers for release of nuclear weapons. But Russia didn't overreact. Russia's not in the business of overreacting. Russia's in the business of managing escalation. And that's what they're doing right now. So I don't see Russia overreacting to this. I do see them carrying out investigation, collecting names. Russia is definitely one of the nations where revenge is a dish best served cold, and Russians have a habit of serving this dish ice cold. So they'll wait as long as it needs, and then they'll take the appropriate response to people. And it is what it is. You want to run with the big dogs. Understand that sometimes you have to pay the big dog price, and Ukraine is running with the big dog, the biggest dog out there, and Russia's taking names, and there will be an accounting. You don't get to go around and murder Russian journalists in St. Petersburg and think that there's not going to be a consequence. But the consequence isn't going to be the kind that changes the trajectory of this conflict.
Speaking of big dog events, we had the Wagner group, which has been dragged in the Western media as just some ragtag band of former prisoners and criminals and all of this. They declared victory in Bakhmut not just a few days ago. And I was scanning the Western corporate press, as I generally like to do on any of these subjects. And what I saw was a whole lot of, well, Ukraine saying uh, Russia's lying. Wagner did not. There's no victory. They're fighting on, and everything is just going to continue as it is. There's just going to be more and more fighting in Bakhmut. What's the reality here, Scott? From your assessment, uh, has Bakhmut been won by Russia, and if so, how did it happen, and what would be the significance?
Well, I think history shows that you shouldn't count your chickens before they hatch. If one goes back to 1942, in August and September, you'll see the German Sixth Army, you know, having taken virtually 98% of Stalingrad. There was just a little strip, a couple 100 meters wide on the west bank of the Volga River, and everybody expected the Germans to complete the task and push through and take it. And Germany was saying Stalingrad had fallen. It hadn't fallen. And the Russians held on to that bridgehead and were able to expand it and eventually trap the Germans into fighting and surround them. So I'm always loath to say something's over until it's actually over. And the bottom line is, even though Wagner has seized the administrative building in Bakhmut, which was blown up, by the way, blown in place by the Ukrainians, so they raised their flag on the rubble of the structure. And they're saying that this is the center of the town. This is it. We've taken Azovstal, the steel factory. We've taken, pretty much everything worth taking. All you have left are some of these western suburbs. That in effect, Bakhmut has fallen. But there's several blocks in western Bakhmut that are still controlled by the Ukrainians. They're still fighting for the train station. Now, Ukraine's going to lose. There's no evidence that Ukraine is somehow going to hold on like the Soviets did on the west bank of the Volga and suck the Russians into a defeat. But there's still fighting going on. So technically speaking, I don't think you can say that Bakhmut has fallen. I think what Prigozhin's doing, the head of Wagner, he's saying that from a practical standpoint, the battle's over. He feels that he has broken the back of the Ukrainian army. They've taken unsustainable casualties. The forces that are left are remnants. There's not the kind of cohesive, organized resistance that existed in the past. And so this is more or less a mopping up operation. And he's probably correct. He's probably correct in that. But still, from the Ukrainian standpoint, they have troops in Bakhmut. They're still pulling triggers, so there's still some fighting going on. So I understand where Wagner's coming from, but I can't endorse that conclusion because purely technically speaking, there's resistance ongoing in Bakhmut, and as long as that happened, it ain't falling.
And when, I mean, if it's inevitable, I mean, I guess we can't put a timetable on it because it seems like the West, NATO, the United States, they're all invested in pushing it for keeping it going. But once Bakhmut does fall, let's say fighting stops there. I mean, what's the significance? I've heard various analyses of this city and why it's so significant. I mean, Ukraine. I mean, this is I don't know. It's almost a year now that there's been just a grind going on there. Thousands upon thousands of Ukrainian troops have died. Russian forces have also been killed in high numbers. Why here? And what will happen in your opinion should this city fall to Russia at some point in the future?
Well, the thing about the Bakhmut Solidar complex, Solidar was sort of a sister city of Bakhmut, located to the north, um, is that it's some of the most defensible terrain in Ukraine, both in terms of what's above ground, but also important what's below ground. Giant salt mines. Bakhmut has salt mines. Solidar had salt mines, and this allowed the storage of munitions, equipment, manpower. Um, so it was eminently defensible terrain. The Ukrainians have been fortifying the territory between the two cities, in front of the cities, all around the cities. And so what the Ukrainians did is they opted to take advantage of this. And when the Russians began their meat grinder operations last May, Ukraine said, "We're in for a fight. We're not giving this stuff up. We're putting our marker down on this table." Um, and depends on the whom you talk to. Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, who is not somebody who is prone to exaggeration. He's somebody who's been very honest about the difficulties that his troops have faced, about the casualties they have taken, about the tenacity of the Ukrainian defenders. He's not a propagandist. He's a realist. But he has said that Wagner has destroyed the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. And that's the significance of the fighting, because the Ukrainian army decided that this is where we're going to put our flag down. This is where we're going to defend. We're not withdrawing from this. They have committed resources into this fight. And Wagner's been compelled to commit resources as well, and Russia's been compelled to commit more resources. Anybody who thinks this fight is only about Wagner doesn't understand what's going on. There's paratroopers, there's motorized rifle, there's artillery, there's air. Everybody's in this fight, but Wagner is playing a central role in the urban fighting. They're the sort of the shock units that are carrying out the attacks on Ukrainian strong points. But the fact of the matter is, Ukraine's army has been eviscerated here. I mean, some people are talking of upward 80,000 casualties in Bakhmut. 80,000 casualties in Bakhmut alone. And these casualties can't be replaced. I mean, right now, the Ukrainians are talking about a spring offensive that they want to launch. Some people say that they've assembled a force of 80,000 that are ready to launch this attack. But I don't know I doubt the numbers are that big. I would imagine the numbers are probably closer to 30 to 40,000. And these aren't the best anymore. The best are dead. The best died in Bakhmut. The best died in Solidar. The best died in Mariupol. The best died in other battles, earlier battles. There was a Ukrainian special forces officer that gave an interview a while back, and many Americans who worked with him and worked with his unit said this is a unit as good as anything in NATO has. These guys are really, really good. Well, they were, you see, because he said 80% of them are dead, and he said the people that have been replacing them are young kids with no experience, none whatsoever. So you can't call it a special forces unit anymore. When the vast majority of your troops are dead and those who've been replaced, there's nothing special about them. They're just bodies. And that's what's going on with the majority of the Ukrainian military. They've suffered immense casualties. Units that have been reconstituted are being reconstituted with people who lack the experience of the other of the soldiers that had been alive this time last year. They're being thrown in with little training, with an inability to maneuver, to communicate. They're simply plug in a hole and then they die. Um, and that's the reality of the Ukrainian military. So anybody who's studied war knows that offensive operations, large scale offensive operations, large scale combined arms operations um, in the offense is some of the most demanding military missions out there. Requires an extraordinary level of training and coordination. And the Ukrainian military simply isn't up to this task. There are some units that have received this kind of training at Grafenwohr in Germany. The United States has been training them. But again, you can count the total number of troops that have received this training in the low thousands. It's not enough to defeat hundreds of thousands of Russians who have been digging in with triple lines of defense, hardened strong points, fire cauldrons designed to trap the Ukrainians when they attack, break up their attack before they get to the lines, destroy them with counterattacks. Um, the Ukrainians, even if they were able to initiate some sort of offensive action, it would be um, absorbed and destroyed and routed in short order by the Russians. And so, if you combine the suicidal tendencies of Ukraine to throw all their resources into Bakhmut, overcommit, and now they've lost. They're in the process of losing. And then they're going to follow this up with a suicidal spring offensive that has no chance of success. And the end result is the Ukrainian army is gutted with nothing to replace it. And that's why I continue to say that this war is going to be over by the end of summer, late fall at the latest. And there's a chance it could be over sooner because the Ukrainian army is going to be buckling soon. You can't absorb these kinds of casualties, these kinds of losses, and be expected to stay on and carry out the level of resistance that they have done so far. Again, I'm not a fan of the Ukrainian military. I hate the fact that they have a tendency to sing, anthems loyal to Stepan Bandera. I hate the fact that many of their ranks have been permeated with followers of Stepan Bandera. But you can never denigrate their courage and their fighting ability. These people are putting up a struggle. They're resisting, and they're making the Russians pay a price for their actions. But no matter how brave the Ukrainians are, they just don't have the quantity of troops and the quality of troops necessary to A, successfully defend Bakhmut, and B, carry out the spring offensive. They're doomed on both fronts. And when both of these collapse, as they will, I think you're going to be looking at the Russians, moving towards end game. That is the decisive final defeat of the Ukrainian army that will prompt the Ukrainian government to sue for peace on terms that will be demanded by Russia.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your take before we move on from the battlefront. Your take on this narrative. So, on the one hand, you even have people maybe who are against U.S., Western, NATO aggression when it comes to Ukraine will say, well, Wagner Group is the same as any other military contractor, any other private military contractor. And this is coupled with how the American political establishment, and of course its loyal allies and vassals all across the West, with Wagner being denigrated with this. Well, they're ineffective prisoners. They're all just released prisoners. They're thugs, and they're not to be regarded. But every time I see Russia making progress on the battlefront, it's always Prigozhin and Wagner Group that is basically giving the declarative statements that they've been making progress. And it seems like a lot of I remember last time you were on, Scott, you also talked about how, yeah, much of even the partial mobilization that Russia did last year hasn't even reached the battlefield. Wagner's been doing a lot of the fighting. What's the truth here about Wagner then? I'm curious about your opinion on this force in Russia that has seemingly been on the front lines of what has been Russia's special military operation.
Well, Wagner's been around since 2014 in Donbass. It was created as a vehicle to allow the covert supply of military assistance to the Donetsk and Lugansk people's militias. The Constitution of Russia doesn't allow for a private military contractor to exist on Russian soil, but it did exist in Donbass. And it was designed to be a contract vehicle. That is, if Russian specific military skill sets are needed, Wagner would sign up people who possess those skill sets. Sometimes it appears that these people were taken directly from the military, and something in the West we would call sheep dipped, meaning that they sort of signed themselves out of the military, signed themselves into this new entity. The CIA used to do that with a lot of special forces guys. U.S. Air Force officers used to be sheep dipped to go fly for Air America in Laos, and then they'd return back to the Air Force and be undipped, and their career would go on. Um, and it appears that that is the case of what happens here. But the bottom line is the idea of Wagner was to provide specific military skills to the Donetsk and Lugansk people's militias that they otherwise wouldn't have, the ability to operate certain weapon systems, etc. Um, Wagner is a professional military force. It's literally second to none when it comes to certain skill sets. They've been doing this a long time. And this is, of course, the high intensity conflict in eastern Ukraine. Um, there's literally not a single American special operator out there. I don't care who they are, whether it's Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, or any of the other Tier 1 entities that possess the kind of urban combat experience that Wagner has. We know there's no civilian, there's no, conventional military force in the United States that has this skill set. So I would hesitate if I were anybody to say, "Oh, Wagner's just a bunch of mercenaries. They're not that good. They use prisoners. They do this, that, and the other thing." I just want to remind everybody that Wagner's winning against a NATO-trained army that's been provided with tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment, um, and Wagner's whooping them, giving them a whooping. So be careful when you say Wagner's this, that, or anything. Wagner's pretty darn good at what they do. They don't do division-sized armored assaults. So if anybody thinks that Wagner is going to suddenly turn into the equivalent of the First Cavalry Division or the First Armored Division, no, that's not what they do. What they do is, storm assaults in urban environment, uh, straight up swamping of the enemy. They're very good at coordinating fire support with this, so their communication skills are good. They are very aggressive, and aggression. Gets them good results because an enemy that's aggressively pursued and pressured in an urban environment has no time to rest. Mistakes will be made, and that's why Wagner keeps advancing. But it also means that they get exposed to fires from the Ukrainians, and so Wagner loses a lot of people. I think this is when Wagner started the Bakhmut Soledar fight back in May of last year. I think it became apparent that this was high intensity combat that would burn Wagner out if they sought to fight it using the resources that they have. And remember, these resources, many of them had been serving in Wagner for 8 years, the total 8 years of the pre-conflict from 2014 to 2022. People with tremendous experience, and Wagner's didn't feel like they should be burning these guys out. So they went with something I think they call it the Operation K, but they went to the prisons and they recruited people in the prisons. There was a screening process. Certain types of crimes weren't allowed to be brought in, but the idea was that you would be purified by fire, and they did that. They recruited thousands of these inmates who were given sufficient training and then sent to the front line to carry out a violent urban assault on the Ukrainians. And these guys are winning. These guys are pretty good. They are very aggressive. They're very committed. They believe that even in death, their reputation will be restored. Their families will be taken care of. This is the kind of hope that they didn't have while seated in prison. And the end result is Wagner's has an unmatched record of military success on the battlefield. Um, these aren't mercenaries; these are very patriotic people, hyper patriotic. They're very dedicated. I just think that the U.S. Military and NATO military should be silent on the issue of Wagner. I mean, if the politicians want to talk about it, but don't embarrass yourself. Don't make a fool of yourself by denigrating a military force that has the accomplishments that Wagner has under its belt. These are unmatched. There's no force on the earth that can match Wagner in terms of their urban conflict skills. The or combat skills, the U.S. military would do well to study this, and hopefully they are studying this in a nonpartisan manner where they can be objective about lessons learned and things of that nature, how to apply some of these lessons learned directly. Other ones can be more suggestive, but the bottom line is we should be adapting to the reality that Wagner faces every day. They're not a criminal enterprise. They are a highly efficient military contract vehicle. I don't like to call them mercenaries because a mercenary fights for the money. Their loyalty is to the dollar. Wagner is not a mercenary outfit. The people fighting are Russian patriots who believe in the Russian cause and are willing to die for the Russian cause. And that goes a long way in terms of providing quality shock troops, people who are willing to give their lives, who won't hesitate to press forward aggressively to gain and sustain a military tactical advantage. Most regular people have sort of the survival instinct, meaning, hey, I want to go home alive. Wagner is, no matter what happens, I want to go home with my reputation, restored. And if that means I have to die to get that done, then they will. But they're not suicidal. It's not like Wagner's throwing human waves in. It's just that they're very aggressive tactics. And the problem is when you attack somebody aggressively of this nature, you swamp them, you overwhelm them, you win. That's why Wagner is winning. But this aggression also creates opportunity for the enemy to ambush you, to hit you when you're least expecting, and inflict casualties. So it's a trade-off, but the end result is what we see on the map. Wagner steadily pushing forward, killing a whole bunch of Ukrainians and outflanking them. But it's misunderstood. And here's the problem about misunderstanding Wagner. It's something I've said many times, but it's applicable here. If you don't define the problem properly, you can't solve the problem, because whatever solution you're coming up to is a solution that has nothing to do with the reality of the problem. You're solving something that doesn't exist. The West, by denigrating Wagner, calling it a private military contractor, calling them mercenaries, is not properly defining Wagner. And therefore, whatever solution they want to come up with to Wagner is not going to work. At the end of the day, Wagner is a professional military organization of extreme capabilities, extreme lethal capabilities, that has proven itself in combat both here and or there in Ukraine, but also in Syria, in Libya, in Mali, and other places in Africa. They're around to stay. They report to the Russian general staff, and I think they're going to be a component of Russia's military capabilities going forward.
Yeah, and in certain countries in Africa, especially Northern Africa, as you mentioned, Wagner has a presence, and there's a lot of people who in these parts of the world who appreciate their presence because they are effective, and because unlike U.S. military partnerships, there's less of the take and more of the give, more of a cooperative relationship around issues like the proliferation of terrorism, which the U.S. helped sow in that part of the world. And it always gets me thinking back to, well, if Wagner was this, because I'm not a military expert like you, I didn't serve like you, you have all this direct experience. But when I just look at the results and even the coverage, even the slanderous coverage, it pales in comparison to like Blackwater Academy, whatever it's called now, the real mercenary groups that have committed atrocious crimes that even the media has had to acknowledge.
I mean, again, take your average Blackwater guy. They were, initially they were special forces guys who got out to make the dollar, to make a buck. They're professional enough, but at the end of the day, the reason why they got out of the U.S. military and joined Blackwater is they were looking for financial gain. And if you're somebody who has a financial motive, you don't want to die. Now, nobody wants to die, but in the military, sometimes you're given orders that say, you're going to die. And you got to obey those orders. That's the military mindset. You took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and you have to obey the lawful orders of your command. Blackwater is not in the business of dying for their country. Blackwater's in the business of doing a mission, making money, and going home. And so there's limitations to what Blackwater can accomplish, because their forces aren't going to go the last full measure, so to speak, to drive home, to do that which is necessary to win, regardless of the potential of loss of life. Wagner soldiers are hyper patriotic. They love Russia. They serve Russia. Yes, they get paid, and they probably get paid well. Not as much as American contractors do, but it's a higher pay, because these are specific skill sets that are needed on the battlefield. But they're also called upon to take great risks, and they do, and they die in large numbers, by the way. But there's a huge difference between Wagner and American private military contractors. Wagner, they fight for Russia. They literally, that's what they're there to fight for, to defend Russia. If you called them mercenary, I think they'd punch you in the mouth. They are contract soldiers. It's just a different contract vehicle, a different payment mechanism. But at the end of the day, they take their orders from the Russian general staff, who directs their operations on the battlefield. And that's the difference. Blackwater was not part of the U.S. military structure. Blackwater was not responsive to the orders coming from the military. Blackwater worked, for instance, for the State Department, provided contract support for the State Department. So it's a completely different kind. Blackwater never engaged in the level of violence that Wagner is engaged in right now. If Blackwater, or whatever their follow-on group is called, got into a stand-up fight with Wagner, I can pretty much guarantee who's going to win that fight, and it's not going to be Blackwater. Wagner is the most combat-capable unit in the world today.
Well, let's maybe just finish up some of the topics here so we can get to the questions. Latest update on NATO expansion is now Finland's in. I think that was announced officially today. The last 2 days, there's been reports. Stoltenberg talking about a session, all of that. Finland shares a border with Russia. Sweden and Finland have been part of this months-long debates with Turkey, especially standing in the middle of Sweden and NATO for a bit, still kind of holding tight a bit there, but with seems like some opening for Sweden. But Finland, there was never really any issue. It was just a matter of time. Russia, of course, has objected to this, as they've objected to NATO expansion since the beginning for many, many years, well before the special military operation. And predictably, NATO and the United States have acted like this is just par for the course. This is just how you normally react to Russian aggression. What's your take on the accession of Finland into NATO, its new membership? Where are we going here? It doesn't seem good. Doesn't seem like good places when it comes to a bigger NATO.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that this is the most recent expansion of the not 1 inch eastward policy that was adopted by NATO back when the Cold War ended. Guarantees given to Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO had no desire to move eastward. That Russia, the Soviet Union, didn't need to fear this, and now here we are. Over 2 decades later, and 3 decades, and we have NATO all the way up to the Russian border. The Baltic states are part of NATO. Ukraine wanted to be part of NATO. That's why the Russians are fighting this war right now. And then there's Finland and Sweden, two longtime neutral parties. They have, especially the Swedes, trained in an interoperable fashion with the West, but they weren't part of the alliance, and they didn't have a need to be part of the alliance, and Russia didn't view them as part of the alliance, and therefore Russian military capabilities along the Finnish border were the minimum necessary to safeguard St. Petersburg, um, the Kaliningrad enclave, and things of that nature. Now Finland has joined NATO, and Vladimir Putin has said that you're a sovereign state, you can do what you want, but this changes everything. We no longer view you as a neutral entity. You're not a neutral party. You're now a hostile nation, an unfriendly nation. You're joining an alliance that is engaged in um, trying to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia, which, if you think about it, means you're trying to kill yourself, because Russia has nuclear weapons, which will be released if the existential survival of Russia is ever put at risk. And the idea that NATO can somehow empower Ukraine to recapture Crimea, recapture Kherson, Zaporizhia, um, ignores the fact that Russia views these territories as part of Russia, constitutionally speaking. Referendum have been passed, votes have been made, and they've been absorbed in. So anybody who says, no, we support a Ukrainian counteroffensive, we support the drive to the Azov Sea, we want to split this, that, the other, you do understand that you're supporting a death penalty for the world, because Russia cannot allow itself to be defeated. And they will use nuclear weapons to prevent that kind of defeat. So if NATO is facilitating, Ukrainian military action of a significant scope and scale to threaten the survival of Russia, then Russia has a duty and responsibility to view NATO as a potentially hostile state. So Finland has now joined an alliance that is openly hostile to Russia. So what they've done now is they have presented themselves as a threat to Russia, and Russia's responding in kind. Part of this expansion that Russia undertook to 1.5 million men from their pre-special military operations strength of around 900,000, 70,000 of those are an army corps that's been created in Karelia to protect St. Petersburg from the Finnish threat or NATO threat, but also threaten Helsinki, threaten some of the most strategically important territory in Finland. And Finland doesn't have an army capable of withstanding this. The Finns have to spend a lot of money to re-up their thing. There's now an 810 mile border. Now, people say, well, that puts Russia at a disadvantage. I'd say, well, no, it actually puts the nation that only has 18,000 regular troops at a disadvantage. And Finland's economy, like all other economies, took a hit from the pandemic, and it takes a hit from Russian energy and the inability to freely access this energy. Where are they going to get the money to do this tremendous military buildup? Are they going to turn their nation into a barracks for NATO? People tend to forget the history of Finland here. 1939, they fought a winter war against the Russians. They lost that in March of 1940 when the Russians broke through the Mannerheim line and confronted the Finns with strategic defeat. They then joined the side of Nazi Germany in 1941, participated in the siege of Leningrad, which killed over 1 million Russians. By the time the siege was lifted, and the Soviets were counterattacking, the Finns wisely opted for peace. They turned on their German ostensible allies, but rather than punishing Finland with an occupation and things of that nature, what Russia said is, you get to live, but you can't be a member of a foreign alliance in perpetuity. That means forever, because we don't want Finland to once again be used as a jumping off block for a hostile military force that wants to threaten St. Petersburg or Leningrad. With the fall of the Soviet Union, Finland was able to opt out of that in perpetuity standpoint, but they still ostensibly remain neutral. And now they join NATO. Now they have to secure that border. It's going to be a huge problem for Finland, and a big problem for Sweden, because I believe now that Finland's in, that Turkey will eventually, Turkey's trying to squeeze the West to get as many concessions as possible from this. And I'm sure there's not only the above the table deals that are taking place, but there's some underneath the table deals taking place between the collective West and Turkey. And I think that Sweden will probably get voted on, sometime before the end of this year, maybe early next year. But Sweden too will be a member of NATO. So now we have the continued expansion of NATO um, against Russia. But in some ways, if somebody was betting on this making Russia weak, it's had the exact opposite effect. Russia has expanded its military to 1.5 million, new military formations going up against Finland. Russia would have had a hard time justifying these expenses from a political standpoint prior to the special military operation, but because of the concerted effort by the collective West to strategically defeat Russia, we now see the Russian population firmly behind this expansion of the military. And again, if I were the Finns, I think you're going to wake up sometime in the next 5 years when the demands on your defense budget are too great and your society won't take it, and realizing that you're on the wrong side of history. You bet on the wrong horse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar, Scott, with the way that Finland and the Nordic countries in that region of Europe are kind of renowned for their social safety net, and NATO is a drain on that as well. It really does have implications, and with that point on Russia, it does make me think about how there are a lot of people in China who, while they may oppose U.S. aggression, they also see it as a credit for and really a spark for how much people have consolidated around and supported and grown their support in their own government, and that's made their society and system stronger. And I see a very similar thing, maybe with different, of course, circumstances and characteristics, happening with Russia. The more that NATO encircles, the more that NATO grows, the more that countries like Finland and Sweden just decide to throw away their futures for NATO. This actually makes support for Russia's government, support for Russia and the defense of Russia within Russia, that much stronger.
No, you're 100% correct. Vladimir Putin. One of the issues we have in the West is that we don't properly define the problem of Russia, and one of the reasons why this happens is we have a class of people I call the Putin whisperers. These are these fake academics. They're not fake. I mean, they have degrees. Michael McFaul has a degree. He's a professor at Stanford. But they're fake Russia experts. He's not an expert on Russia. He's an American propagandist. Angela Stent at Georgetown. It's the same thing. She's not an expert on Russia. She's an American propagandist. Fiona Hill, an American propagandist. Um, these are people that have a vision of what Russia should look like. Amazing that Westerners, outsiders, have a vision of what Russia should look like. And they've been in favor of implementing policies to achieve that objective. And that objective is to break Russia up into smaller constituent parts. You see, we're very fearful of the size of Russia, the physical size of Russia, but also what's contained in that landmass. A great deal of the world's resources. And we are nervous that a single nation has access to all these resources because they can not only become self-sustainable in certain critical industries, but they will be able to help others. And in this case, others means China, with the world's largest population, with a modernizing industrial base, modernizing infrastructure, and now you bring China and Russia together in this nexus of economic capacity, and it's an unbeatable force. This is why the Trans-Eurasian Economic Union that's being pushed by the Russians and the Chinese is a serious thing. I don't think the United States has properly defined what's going on in Russia. We don't understand what their strategic objectives are vis-a-vis China. We don't understand what China's strategic objectives are vis-a-vis Russia. Take a look at Vladimir Putin's meeting with Joe Biden in June of 2021. When Joe Biden came out of that without prompting, he turned to the media and said, well, I think Putin should not get close to China. That's a bad thing. That China has ill intent towards them, etc. the president was totally out of touch because you see Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have had great relations for a long time, friendly relations. I mean, like friends, real friends. These are guys that meet each other for their birthdays. They socialize. They make pancakes together. They make I mean they cook. They have a really good relationship, and and how insulting is it then for the United States president to say, I have to educate Putin on China? I'm pretty sure Putin knows more about China than you do, Mr. Biden. I think he's understands the relationship. Putin gave a speech even in the aftermath of the recent visit by Xi Jinping. Putin gave a speech where he said, we have our history with China. I mean, he's not pretending that everything has been roses with China. We had our history, he said. We have our problems, but we are in a situation where we don't have any other choice. And this isn't a bad choice. It's not as though we have to hold our nose on this. This isn't a bad choice. This is a good choice. It requires some changes on our part, but the West has compelled us to make these changes. So we are going to make these changes. And now we have this relationship that is stronger than any alliance. And I know a lot of people in the West roll their eyes when they hear, it's just Russian propaganda. Well, if you take a look at the NATO Charter, for instance, people like to talk about the strength of the NATO Charter. But the NATO Charter is far more restrictive than it is expansive, meaning that once you join NATO, a lot of controls come down on you because it's a negotiated agreement on a consensus basis. It means you've subordinated a lot of your sovereignty to the totality of an alliance that in some instances is deeply divided. Now we take Russia, China. There's no treaty, none whatsoever. So when people say, well, what are the limitations on it? There are no limitations. They can go anywhere they want it to go, or nothing can happen. And it doesn't change the impact. They still are friendly nations. This allows for a very pragmatic approach. To give you an example of this pragmatism, recently, Russia had signed some concessions with Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, for oil exploration in the vicinity of the South China Sea in waters that are contested with China. And Russia has been, actively drilling. They have their rigs there. They're drilling it for joint exploitation. And recently, a Chinese naval vessel came and sailed through there, and one of their, an act of intimidation, I guess, against the Vietnamese. There were people that were shouting because this happened right after Xi Jinping returned back to China. And people were shouting, saying, oh, look, this is proof that China doesn't take Russia seriously. This is garbage relationship. They lied. There's tensions there. And I asked a senior Russian official about this, a former diplomat who, old China hand, Maria Zakharova's father, by the way, used to be a diplomat in Beijing for many years. And he said, look, Russia's always been pragmatic about, these things. Russia's not taking sides. Russia is doing what it does and will continue to do that. And in some instances, this may cause problems with the Chinese, but the nature of the relationship between Russia and China is that because there is no treaty constraints or treaty that defines things, Russia can be pragmatic about what's going on in these oil fields, but still reach out to the Chinese about gas deals and other deals to bring in Belts and Roads Initiative, to ask Xi Jinping to make a phone call on behalf of a potential peace. Why? Because there are no limitations to this relationship. This relationship can go in any direction whatsoever. Imagine that. Imagine the maturity of your approach towards interacting with other nations, where it wasn't a zero-sum game where you had to win, or because if you didn't win, then it was a loss. What if you actually just sat down and respected everything and treated each thing separately? You didn't have some all-encompassing manifest destiny type plan that said America must rule the world through a rules-based international order, but instead you said we'll take each thing, one at a time and treat it the way it deserves to be treated, with the respect. But we don't allow this to actually, dictate this outcome. Where would we be today if that was the approach we took? I would hasten to believe that we would be far more deeply entrenched in the Middle East because nations would want us to be there. But when we decide that our task is to illegally occupy a third of Syria to steal oil to finance a terrorist organization that that fights against a ostensible NATO ally, think of what I just said there, the complexity of that. Then because that's what we do. That's what America does. Um, but had we not done this, where could we be? We could be in there, a player, uh, still able to ask our friends to manipulate the oil market to our economic benefit because we're friends, we're friendly. There's no reason to fear us. But now nobody saw. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman just came out and said, "I don't care what Joe Biden thinks about me anymore. I'm done with him. I'm done with American opinion." Saudi Arabia has divorced itself from the United States orbit, and this is a game changing event.
Yeah, the world is certainly changing, and NATO expansion is definitely at the heart of it. And the expansion of this chaos and destruction that you speak of, the way the US relates to the world, is helping to lay a foundation for this. And it, as you said, I think it goes hand in hand. It's like it's not a bad option for Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, for much of the Arab world, much of the African continent. It's not a bad option to come together and try to figure out something else, and not least because, well, the other option is actively harming you every step of the way. But I
Not just
wanted to.
militarily, but economically. I don't know. Did you see what Marco Rubio said the other day?
Right, I think it was something about he was admitting fear of this development, I believe, right?
Yeah, he basically said, because Brazil sat down with China and said, "We're done with the dollar. We're going to do business in the yuan." And he's like, "Oh my God, the fourth largest economy. I mean, the largest economy in the southern hemisphere is decoupling from the dollar. We won't be able to sanction them anymore. We won't be able to exert our influence on them. They're going to function as a sovereign nation, and this is a terrible thing." Imagine. I mean, at least he was honest. I have to give him,
Yep.
straight up props for wow, what honesty. But then the spokesperson for the White House, I'll mispronounce her name, so I don't want to say it to insult her, but she basically was talking about this, and she said, "Those nations that seek to decouple the dollar, you are offending the American people." Because the well-being of the American people depends on the ability of the dollar to be the supreme currency, the reserve currency, so that we can leverage this to enhance the da 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 da. And she doesn't even listen to what she's saying. She's basically saying that if a nation decides that they don't want to do business with the dollar, that uh, that America will be compelled to intervene because we have to have you do business with the dollar because otherwise you're harming the economy of America, and that's an insult to the American people. The arrogance and the hubris. Look, I don't want the dollar to collapse. I don't know how about you, Danny, but I get paid in dollars, and and the dollars are what I take to the grocery store, and it sort of upsets me sometimes when the price of food goes up um, everywhere. I mean, we have a favorite diner that we go to every weekend for breakfast. Typical American diner, and they're they apologized. They came in and said we had to raise our prices, and I'm talking about not an insignificant raise because just the price of food has gone up. You see that if you go to restaurants, you go to the grocery store, it's there. The I want the dollar to be stable. I'd like the dollar to have value because that way, when I earn $1,000, I can buy $1,000 worth of stuff. I don't want to earn $1,000 and only be able to buy $800 worth of stuff or $600 worth of stuff. Because you know what? Inflation is making the value of my dollar decrease. And my employer, by the way, it's not Russia, my employer is not giving me more money. It's not like my employer is going, "Oh gosh, look, the cost of living cost you 12.5% in the last year." Yeah, 12.5%. That's inflation and everything else. Some people say it's even higher. That means that instead of earning $100, I'm now earning, here we go with my military math, but it's going to be somewhere in the area of 80, 7.5%, or 87 and $87.5. That ain't $100. So, and then next year when they factor it in, it's going to be around $70. It ain't $100, but I'm only my pay hasn't been adjusted. I need the dollar to do well. I need the dollar to be strong, and it's not. It's failing. But that's not a international security issue. That's just the stupidity of American policy. Hey, I tell you what, Marco Rubio and lady spokesperson of the White House, whose name I can't pronounce, um, stop stealing money. For instance, if you're going to call the dollar the world's reserve currency, and people are going to have faith in that, but then you go and you steal 700, 800 billion dollars of Russian sovereign wealth for no legal reason, just because you're mad at Russia. Understand that the rest of the world's going to sit there and go, "Whoa!" I mean, would you, Danny? Again, would you put your money in a bank that just arbitrarily wake up and say, "Yeah, we're taking your account"? No.
I feel, and I hesitate with the banks. I mean, now, like, what
Yeah,
with
now
this
it's
banking collapse, it's like, oh shit, what's gonna happen to our money?
no, that's right. But we don't want to give away our money like that. So I'm not a fan of the collapse of the dollar. I don't want anybody to think the fact that I'm out there defending other people's sovereign rights that this makes me happy. But it's not their fault. The reason why they don't want the dollar is we made it toxic. We steal your money. We sanction you. Listen to what Marco Rubio said. If you break your way from the dollar, he's not talking about denied economic opportunities. He's saying we can't sanction you. We can't punish you. As if the only thing, the only tool in the American toolbox is, from a non-military standpoint, is the militarization of the economy. We are going to sanction you. We are going to punish you. That's the only thing we think. Look at what we're doing around the world. The only thing we talk about is sanctions. We never talk about going out there and engaging in a belts and roads initiative type thing. The last G7 meeting last summer, old Biden's in there, we're going to come up with the counter to the Chinese Belts and Roads Initiative, a $600 billion fund. Really, Joe? $600 billion? But it wasn't, was it? No, it was really $300 billion in contributions. And then you wanted the private sector to kick in $300 billion, but they're not going to. So it's a $300 billion fund, which nobody's funding. Nobody's putting money. So it's a $0 fund. And you want that to be competing with what? In the last decade, what has China put into BRA? $7 to $10 trillion?
Yeah.
Trillion. That's with a T, ladies and gentlemen. That's a lot of money. And we can't match that. We can't match that. We could if we weren't busy stealing money and sanctioning people, if we were focused on sound economic principles and working with other nations without moral strings attached, coming in saying, here's a contract. But first, you have to buy into our abortion policies. You have to buy into this. You have to buy into that. And nations are going, we're done with that. We're finished. And they're jumping ship, and they're all jumping ship at the same time. This is problematic. This is a problem for the American economy.
Indeed, indeed. And I think it's a good time to get to the Patreon questions now as we close up here. But yeah, no, everything you said is 100% true. The dollar has been, I mean, it's been weaponized. The greenback, the paper, there's nothing about that screams, oh no, danger, danger. It's when the politics, the policies, as you said, the weaponization of the dollar to destroy other countries through sanctions, and also using military power, using military might to enforce the sanctions, to enforce also the indebtedness and the inequality of it. It doesn't have to be like that, but it is. And that's why countries all around the world, led by China and Russia, are saying, I mean, it's kind of a domino effect. It's, you hear Egypt, all across Africa now. You have the Nigeria, you have the president of Ghana, president of Nigeria, as Kamala Harris and all the other U.S. officials that have visited over the last 6 or so months all across Africa. They're all saying, no, forget all that China talk. We don't want to hear it. We want to be trading with China. We will make our own choices about how we how we decide and determine our economic destiny. And that rhetoric, that policy all around the world is getting more and more intense. So everything you said, Scott, is 100% just true. But let me ask you a few questions to close out here, and I'll be on for another 15-20 minutes with some announcements before the stream ends altogether. But for those of you who are maybe new to the stream, to this channel, I do collect questions, also guest suggestions, and all sorts of other perks on Patreon. So patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. And I also ask Substack and YouTube member questions. But I have 2 Patreon member questions. So for those of you who support this work, who appreciate this channel, please do subscribe, and the links are in the description. But I wanted to ask you first, Cultist, who's a regular submitter of questions. Since this has to do with Ukraine, let's start there. Do you think Russia will pursue regime change and eventually take Kiev?
I believe Russia will pursue regime change. Denazification continues to be the one of the principal objectives of this special military operation, and the Russian leadership and from the president on down have classified Zelensky as a rogue government, as a Nazi government. So if you're denazifying and you call a government Nazi, that means there's going to be no long-term viability for them. Even if Zelensky goes to the negotiating table, one of the things that he'll be negotiating is his demise, political demise. So there will be regime change, and it's not just a physical removal of the leaders, but it's changing every aspect of the way Ukraine is governed. And we're talking about, from an ideological standpoint, the total elimination of the ideology of Stepan Bandera, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism, and this white supremacist neo-Nazi approach that has permeated the Ukrainian government in a post-Maidan, post-2014 timeframe. This is going to go. Russia's made it clear that that's the future. And the longer this conflict goes on, the longer things happen. For instance, this religious war that's taking place right now between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Here in the West, I don't know, I keep seeing idiots laughing at the videos of these Ukrainians doing some sort of modern dance around a lady who is kneeling and genuflecting because of her faith, and the fact that this centerpiece of Russian Orthodoxy is being desecrated by people on the orders of the Ukrainian government, and this resonates with the Russian people. You don't have to agree with the Russians, but you have to respect the fact that it resonates with them. So you have to understand that there's a cause and effect relationship here. That this Zelensky government is an evil government, straight up evil government. They kill journalists for daring to speak out against them. And truth in advertising, they're trying to kill me too. So, I take it a little bit personal. That might color my assessment of them, but no, these are neo-Nazi supporting, fanatics who the Russians are going to purge. Now, do you have to take Kiev to do this? It depends on how you define taking Kiev. I think the Russians are avoiding the classic battle for Berlin scenario where you're going to go block to block and destroy the entire city, take it. I think they're promoting instead the collapse of Ukrainian society and the subsequent collapse of Ukrainian government to be replaced by a government that'll be to the Russians' liking, that will enact policies that the Russian government desires. And so it would be the de facto occupation of Kiev, meaning that the political entities in control of Kiev will be working on behalf of Russia. Therefore, there's no need for Russia to physically take the city. I don't think Russia wants to take the city. I don't think Russia wants to destroy the city. I think Russia wants just a different government. So I think you can, that's the direction Russia going. Now, that doesn't mean that, if this war continues and there can be no political outcome, that Russia won't make an effort to take Kiev. I just don't think that that's top on their list of things to do.
Yeah, no, those are good points. This question may be hard to answer in short order. I definitely don't want to keep you here so late this evening, Scott. But this question is pretty broad and also, I think, a very good question. So I wonder your take on this. BK, Patreon subscriber, asks, how might we best expose the hypocrisy of the United States, especially when warmongers are exploiting lefty/democratic ideals in order to garner hatred against Russia and other foreign powers? And they gave the example of like, what do we do when, for example, the United States, in order to impose its hegemony, is exploiting the LGBT community, or even the climate question. I mean, these are huge issues, especially with the U.S. like lecturing Uganda. I mean, you see it in Russia all the time too, right? Russia with its, the legislation on, LGBTQ policy. Like, there is this narrative that, all these countries that are against the United States, or in some capacity they're working towards sovereignty, must kind of answer for their crimes. I mean, how would you, I guess, approach that? And I know you've been talking about your own activism lately on Substack, so you can also give that a plug, because I know that you are writing a series now on that, as well. So take it away. In a couple minutes.
And
Unfair.
a topic with no sensitivity whatsoever.
No.
So look, I'll just answer it straight up, and I apologize if I insult anybody. It's not my intent to insult anybody. I'm an American citizen who believes that the fundamental rights that accrue to Americans accrue to everybody, whether your religion, your ethnicity, your sexuality. You are who you are, and you deserve to be respected and treated properly for that. But first of all, we have to understand that notion has not successfully translated to the totality of America. There is an extraordinary objection amongst more conservative elements in this country towards the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of hypocrisy. I'll be we all know about the Wide Stance Montana senator, who, I'm always suspicious of people who jump up and scream about homosexuality, this, homosexuality, that, because I'm like, yeah, you're probably you got a subscription to some gay dating site, and you go on long vacations with, your boyfriend who you're mentoring, or whatever excuse they come up with. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there, but there's also, to be straight up, the whole trans thing is a difficult pill for some people to swallow. I mean, first of all, the notion of empowering a minor to make critical decisions about their sexuality, some people, that rubs them the wrong way. They view that as child abuse. And again, you can disagree with that, but you can't ignore the fact that people feel that way. So here in the United States, which, I think one of the reasons why we're able to embrace diversity is because we have these fundamental rights, et cetera, but we're having trouble, adapting to this and making things mesh. Now we step out of the United States into more conservative societies around the world. And again, the reason why we have the ability to have discussions about LGBTQ and things of this nature is because these are internal discussions. Nobody has imposed them on us. These are discussions that have arisen from the development of our society. Now, some people can say that's a bad development, good. I don't care. That's your business. That's the beauty of America. We all have our own opinions. But this is something that's developed from inside. Imagine, however, though, if somebody came in and tried to impose this on us. Imagine if we're a nation of people that almost all agree that a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and a family unit is a man marrying a man, and that's God's, design to have children, the nuclear family, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have another nation coming and saying, time out. We're decided that nope. In order for you to do business with us, you got to throw all that stuff away, and you got to buy into our notion of LGBTQ, genders and trans and all this stuff. And they're going to sit there and go, no, we're not. And we know this is look what happened in the Republic of Georgia right now. I speak about Georgia because I know Georgia. My wife is from Georgia. Very, very conservative society, very conservative society, pro-West, but very conservative, traditional family values, et cetera. USAID comes in with its $40 million a year aid, which is a lot of money in Georgia. And they seek to shape Georgian society by funding the development of communities at the local level of diversity. So we're going in and saying, here's the money. And now remember, you can do this when you can outspend people, because understand the conservative people in Georgia don't have a lot of money. And so now we're coming in and we're offering money to empower diversity at the grassroots level. And then we go on top of that and we reform the election system that allows these diverse grassroots movements to express themselves without fear of opposition. So we're empowering them electorally so they can elect people up. And then we superimpose upon that control of the media. We call it countering disinformation. But what it means is we're against any dissent. So any conservative Georgian groups that say, hey, we're not comfortable with this, that's disinformation, suppress it. We only encourage voices that sound like us and say what we want. And next thing you know, we've built a pyramid where at the top is, traditional conservative Georgian values, but they're going to be pushed out from the ground up. It's soft revolution. This is what we're doing throughout the world. We come in, we import our way of thinking in order to compel societal changes in governments that don't necessarily want it. This is problematic. And then what happens is you get violent pushback. And the people that pay the price are the LGBTQ communities that are now stuck in the middle of a larger political struggle. So I have my personal opinions. It's nobody's business. I believe what I believe, and I will vote in accordance with that. But I will never stop somebody from believing what they believe and voting in accordance with what they believe. I'm not somebody who believes that you deny rights to rights to vote to people. There's issues of what do you do about bathrooms. I have my opinion. It's my opinion. I will vote in accordance with my opinion about that. How do I feel about transgendered men swimming on a women's football team? I guess they're not transgendered men because that means they're women. Men who shows you where I'm coming from. I have I'm still trying to come to grips with this, but I'm trying to be respectful of everybody. It's a learning process for me. But there are things that insult my conservative bent. And because it insults me, I can understand that it insults others abroad too. That, rather than try and compel them to accept what we dictate must be the outcome, we should instead seek to let them develop on their own at their own pace. But there's an impatience right now, and I think we're using LGBTQ diversity as a weapon, and it's going to fail. It's going to backfire. It's going to backfire globally, and I think it's going to backfire here at home. And again, for those who promote LGBTQ rights, I think you're going to get the opposite of what you want to have happen. I think what you should want is for a broader tolerance of diversity and inclusion. What you're going to get is violent reaction, and that's not good for anybody.
Well, this channel is the left lens, and my take on this too, it's very similar to you, Scott, is one, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house, right? Like the United States does weaponize LGBTQ rights. It weaponizes all kinds of these issues of diversity, quote unquote, and there are very whether there's some on the right who make these arguments, but there's a lot of prominent people on the left who also make these arguments that this is weaponized to achieve foreign policy ends, and that is 100% true. And the U.S. also has no right to do that because it does suffer from incredible problems of its own making, as you said, as a part of its own developed society, how its society has developed. And that is, in my opinion, where the focus should be. And so anyone, whether it's on the side of you oppose these issues and change, when it comes to new developments over the past several decades to make more prominent certain questions of gender or race, or whether you oppose those things because you're conservative, or whether you want to see people's lives improved who may go through legitimate grievances. That's where I fall. It's like, there are legitimate grievances. Many of them material. People do suffer from discrimination for many different reasons. But that should be what the United States people who are fighting for these rights should handle internally. And once it goes into the NGO nexus, it becomes part of a foreign policy agenda with real money behind it, then it really does destroy it does destroy the legitimacy of any of these movements, because it, as you said, it will backfire. It's going to backfire abroad. You shouldn't be telling people what to do abroad. People need to figure their own societies out. That's the definition of sovereignty, self-determination. That's law. You need to respect international law. That's it, regardless of what you believe on any of these questions. And then here, it's not as if there's a strong move. There's not strong movements in the United States. There really aren't. So if you are really concerned about these things, build something here, make it productive, try to convince people, do it in a way that will bring real tangible change, and focus on the issues. And you're going to have to connect it to what is going on abroad, everything that we talk about here too, because, well, you can't really get anything done if there's trillions being spent, funding, Nazis in Ukraine and jihadists in Syria, and occupying a third of a country in like Syria, or taking money from Russia, taking assets from Russia, or encircling China. You're really not going to get much done in any respect, and that's where we come from, or like I come from here on this channel. Is we shouldn't even be like, it shouldn't be a news story. We should be focusing on, well, if we really do care about the rights of LGBTQ people, solve that here. Solve that here. Russia is a different country. It's going to go through things differently, and trust Russian people to figure it out, because they should be in control of their own destinies.
I had an interesting conversation with a Russian who, again, I don't know if this is true, but I don't have any reason to doubt this person. But they say, all the attention that the United States places on Russia and their homophobic policies and laws, etc. They said, there are more gay-friendly parks in Moscow than in any major American city, and there's no problems. That there's a thriving gay community. But the problem, I guess, would come if they tried to have a gay pride parade. That would be problematic for the Russians. They don't want it in their face. They don't want to be promoted to the children. But I think the Russians are far more tolerant than the West gives them credit to be. But they're doing it on their terms, to meet their societal norms and standards. It's a very conservative society, and they just aren't. You can't get them to go from A to Z. And if America wants people to even consider some of these policies, it would help if we actually put a viable working model on the table, saying this is how you successfully integrate LGBTQ, issues into a society, and the society thrives. Look at America. Instead, they got transgendered people shooting up schools. They got violence here. It's not the model, though. If that's your model of success, you can't blame the world for saying no thanks. We don't want any part of that.
Indeed. Scott, it was great to be with you once again. Thanks so much for joining. You got me a copy. Unfortunately, it's far away from me right now in my bedroom, but I will pull it up. You do have a new book out, Disarmament in the where is it? In the Time of Perestroika. I do encourage people to get this book. But do you want to just any plugs before you head out tonight? Here's the book.
Well,
Get it wherever books are sold.
Yeah, I mean, you can get that on my website, scottritterextra.com. You can buy the book there. You can go to Amazon and buy it. You can go to Clarity Press and buy it, Barnes and Nobles. And I'll just say that one of the most pressing issues of the day is disarmament to prevent a nuclear race. We have a big election coming up in 2024, And I think people should educate themselves as much as possible. And I think this book provides not only a sound education into the one of the foundational moments in arms control history, the implementation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, but it also shows how that history of implementation serves as a template that could be used today to try and improve Russian American relations. I just point out in the 1980s, the Soviet Union was the evil empire, and we were enemy number one. We didn't like each other, but somehow through arms control, we were able to break through that and move in a positive direction. And today we have a lot of tension between Russia and the United States with no arms control, the danger of an arms race, and all that that entails. And this book provides a template of hope that says if we can just sit down with the Russians and begin to have, constructive discussions on arms control, that once again we can find common cause, break through these walls of Russophobia, fear, ignorance, and move forward in a constructive manner, a peaceful coexistence with Russia. Peaceful coexistence is a heck of a lot better than what we got going on right now.
Indeed, indeed. Well, appreciate your time, Scott. We'll have to do it again soon. Thanks so much for joining me this evening. I'll be on for another 15 minutes, everyone, so stick around. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Danny.
Bye. All right, everyone. All right. So that was a great conversation. With that said, I do have a few announcements. I do also want to say, though, that, with that last question from a Patreon subscriber, I have my own opinions, right? So, like with the shooting of the recent mass shooting, I can't even reference where it happened. Honestly, there's so many. I wouldn't agree that being trans would be a precipitator of this. But I would say that, if Russia were to look at the model of US social relations, is if, you already have a country that has a large Orthodox community, you have a country that went through the end of the Soviet Union, conservatization there. There is a large conservative bent in Russia. And so they're not going to look at examples like that with the media around it in a positive light. But here I am respectful to and also in defense of any group, any people who has legitimate material grievances, whether they're trans people, whether they're Black people. This channel has been very consistent in promoting the fact that, the United States needs to take care of its own home and needs to take care of its own issues. And these issues are very important. We tend to, here on the left lens, focus on geopolitics, especially lately with all of the world developments being so hot. But my take is if you want to fight for the rights of oppressed people in the United States, and there are many groups, then you need to take care of that here. And you need to fight the war machine abroad, the way the United States deploys its power abroad, if you're going to be successful, because those issues will, those problems, the way the US projects its power, has direct consequences for you and any one of your, whether it's you're a worker trying to get better conditions, whether you're a trans person trying to have your rights respected in very material ways, whether you're trying to fight this like liberal co-optation and, just utter exploitation of these issues to sanitize them and make them sort of part of this corporate agenda. Whatever you're doing, you're going to have to fight the war machine. So that's where I stand. And so, me and Scott may not agree on all of these issues. So just to let you know, okay? Because this is not a channel where we go, where we go into these things deeply, but I do appreciate all the Patreon community members who submit these questions. And I want you to be sure to subscribe to Patreon if you're able. That's how you keep this channel sustainable. Also, YouTube membership is great, but patreon.com/Dhaiphong is the best place to support me, where you can suggest guests. There's a lot of other perks, suggest questions. I generally ask them to our guests. And so many other things, early access, early notifications, things like that. But your support goes a long, long way. So with that said, everyone, I'm going to be on just for a couple more minutes, but I do want to do two announcements. My next time streaming will probably be this coming Sunday, unless something changes. I know quite a bit. Got a lot of things to take care of in life. Oops, sorry. that I got a lot of things to take care of in life. So you'll want to tune in on Sunday. It'll be a Sunday morning stream, I believe, with Brian Berletic. We'll probably talk some of Ukraine, but more on China. I didn't get to everything with Scott because there was so much to talk about. So, with that said, I do want to show you something. So, I want to talk to you about a resource, okay? And I'm going to put the link in the description. So, uh, I've been using this resource because, as I said earlier, I like to scour the mainstream media. Not because I love the mainstream media, but I believe that the mainstream media is incredibly important to study because it helps us understand where the establishment is. It helps us understand how they're talking about it. And oftentimes, as you've seen here, maybe you go to Brian Berletic's channel, we talk about it in various capacities with guests like Scott Ritter. The mainstream media can actually inform you on the problems that are going on, not because they're intentionally trying to tell you the truth, but because some facts are impossible to distort. So it's important to read it because you can get the perspective of the establishment, of the neocons, of the foreign policy establishment through mainstream media. But with that said, I've been using a particular resource for this, and it's called Ground News. So I'm entering in the chat ground.news/the left lens, where you can follow along with me. And I just want to share with you one of their key features because I think it's really cool and it will help you aggregate your news sources. So um, I'm going to pull up what I wanted to show you. So we talked about today Finland joining NATO, right? And so it's a huge story. Finland has joined NATO. It's the media is calling it a historic shift all across. And Ground.news helps you do so many things. So just to review what it does, because I've talked about it here, is Ground.news not only aggregates all of the total news sources that have covered this issue, it also tells you maybe where they are falling on the political spectrum. And you can also then go to that distribution here and see that most of the outlets are center politically. Usually, establishment is what that means. There's some left and there's some right on this issue. But one of the incredible features, though, is the ownership distribution and how ownership of media is distributed by source. So here you see, for example, all of the resources from Bloomberg, Toronto Sun, Haaretz, right? You can go on and on, Times of India, that have covered this story. And you can see that out of the total, 46% are media conglomerates, only 10% are independent media. So there's not a lot of independent study happening here, but a lot of big media conglomerates covering this and likely shaping your opinion about it. And then you'll see the distribution by which are government sources, which are wealthy privately owned sources. And then you could scale out from there. So media conglomerates, you can scale out from the Murdoch family being in ownership of all of these resources. Look at the Mercury, Courier Mail, New York Post, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, and the like. So it really does help you understand where you're getting your information from. And of course, you get all the articles here that you can choose from. But one of the interesting parts of this is the browser extension. So see up here, there's a browser extension you can place within your particular browser. And if you click on it, you will go to, so I'm using Chrome right now, and it says, do you want a second opinion on the news that you're reading? And you can add it to your Firefox, your Microsoft, your Google Chrome, whatever you're using, you can add this extension. And so I want to show you how this extension works, okay? So I'm actually going to stop sharing this screen. And once you add this extension, you will see how it works when you just use or look up, whether you're looking up separately on Ground News or on Ground News, and you click on the link. For example, here, Dawn News, right, has covered this story, and you can see the browser extension here. Let me see if I can actually zoom in on this. That doesn't get bigger. Oh, yeah, it gets a little bigger. So here you see, oh, it went away. Okay. So actually I have to something happened there. So let me actually reset this. Let's see if it'll come back. If I Oh yes, here it is. So I'm back on the article now. And here you see the browser extension at the top. It pops up. So you will get directly, right, that bias distribution. You will see where it's split among the 341 sources through the one that you're reading. And then you will be able to go and click on it, and it will take you to this subject matter that we were just on. So I'll stop the screen here and I'll show you where it just took me because it opened another tab. Let me share it here. So it took me back to this here, which so you can actually, once you are reading a news story and you want to read more and you want to get more information about how this subject is being covered, you want to then look through, as we just did before, the distribution of bias, the various articles, right? So you can go through the articles. The Inquirer has mixed factuality. It's a media conglomerate. Sky News Australia, right-wing leaning, Murdoch family owned. And then you can, of course, go through the factuality, the ownership, as I showed you before, the location of these sources, etc., as just a way to organize, curate, and have you with more efficiency, and also I think just a more pleasant environment for media consumption. Plus you get all of this good information and all of this aggregated information in one resource. So ground.news is a sponsor of this channel. I want to thank them. And I sent the link in the chat. You can also find the link in the description to subscribe to their Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to all of their features. So thanks so much to Ground.News for sponsoring this video and this channel. It's been great because they do share a mission to help us read media in a way that doesn't exclude things. While we might, we won't always agree with the way that these kind of aggregators do their work, but this resource in particular is different from the others in that it doesn't exclude, right? So while others will say, RT is banned, CGTN is state-owned media, you have access to them here, and they do not discriminate on them here. And that's why I find it to be a different kind of resource that is more useful than I think NewsGuard and others that have political agendas. So thank you so much to Ground.News again. With that said, everyone, those are the announcements. That's all I had to say. We had a great conversation with Scott. And yeah, I just want to reiterate, because I didn't want to get into this. This wasn't why Scott and I have a good relationship. I truly respect him. He is a champion of peace and the peace movement. And, we might not see eye to eye on the question that the Patreon subscriber PBK asked on everything personally. But this channel is about this broader problem here. That is, there is a concerted effort to exploit and use. You could see them as legitimate because some of these issues are legitimate. I know trans people, and I know that they get discriminated on the job. I know that they get paid less on the dollar than people who are not, who do not identify as trans. It happens also still by race, Black people, right? Look at the prison numbers. Look at the way the prison population is distributed in the US. We can go on and on and on in every single issue. The problem is when elites take these issues and say, well, we can use these for profitable means. We can use these to help wage wars. And it's when the people are so disempowered that they can't resolve these questions among themselves, right? A lot of the culture wars, a lot of the, internal fighting, a lot of that is because these issues become weaponized and people can't resolve them amongst themselves. And we have elites actually resolving them for us in a way that only serves them. And so that's what I oppose. I think that's what needs to be clarified here, because I did see some people in the chat being like, oh, he didn't push back. Well, this channel is about peace, and it's about building broad unity around it. However, if we were to get into discussions outside of here about this question, then we would, we may have some disagreements, but that doesn't mean we can't still, if we oppose NATO's aggression on Russia, we can't still unite on that. While we may go separate ways on other questions and hopefully resolve them in ways that align with principles that maybe we can all agree on. But that can't happen in this environment where everything is politicized, not for purposes of the people and of people who are suffering, people who are oppressed, people who are being taken advantage of by elites. It is actually just serving elites. And so we have to be able to distinguish between those two things, because those two things do exist. There are distinctions to be made. And that's what I always try to harp on this channel is, it's not culture war versus liberal identity politics. No, there's a reality that these two contending kind of establishment political tendencies are trying to divert you from. There's a reality on the ground in the United States. It ain't really a good one for so many people. And this has to go with economic, class, race, all kinds of issues. And abroad, well, you get all that you need here, I think, to know about what happens abroad. So with that said, everyone, I want to end here with urging you, please. I'm not begging, but I do have to say that this channel is going through some changes. We have some personnel changes. I don't have a staff, but I do have people who help me that I try to compensate as needed. If you want to see this work be sustainable, it's I won't be able to rely on volunteers, right? So I will need to increase the ability to spread the labor of love here, but that labor should be compensated. Technology is the same thing. In order to expand and be able to make this program what it should be, it does need to be compensated. So with that said, if you support this work, if you appreciate this channel, if you love to see guests like Scott and our conversations about geopolitics, about international affairs, about world developments from a perspective you don't get to hear from the establishment media because they're so invested in war, and more war, then support this program at patreon.com/Dhaiphong. And of course, everyone who's viewing, who's liked the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications about all of that. That goes a long way as well. You can also go to the description of this video and just go to the first, if you want to become a YouTube member, like Valley, who just became one. Thanks so much. Hit the join button right next to the name of the channel below this video, right before the description of the video. You can also join on Substack. There's annual options there with very similar features to Patreon, including original articles. And you can also subscribe to the free newsletter there so you're notified, because guess what? YouTube doesn't like notifying you. So hitting the notifications bell, do it. But know that Substack is a great free newsletter that can help you get informed when I go live. And you can also follow me on Telegram at t.me. So t.me/Dhaiphong, or search China in geopolitics with Danny Haiphong on Telegram. But with that said, everyone, appreciate you. I do have Telegram. I'll put that here. t.me/Danny Haiphong is my Telegram channel name. Now it's in the chat. All right. And you can find my channel. It's China in Geopolitics. All right. Definitely follow me there. And yeah, before I go, let me actually just get that link, because I want to, yes, let me see. Yes, t.me/Danny Haiphong. I had it right. So definitely subscribe there. It's in the chat now. The chat's going kind of fast, so hope you can get it. It's on my link tree and the link in the description as well, that you can find in the description of the video. With that said, everyone, peace out. It was a great conversation, always fun. And Scott's always great. He's a great friend of this show, as are so many. And I look forward to another stream soon. Brian Berletic, likely Sunday being the next, unless something changes with developments and time. But I really do appreciate all of you, and hope that you all have a great rest of your day. And we'll be back soon. Okay, take good care. Bye bye.